I'm reporting on two projects. One is around human sensors, which really focuses more on text-based social media like Twitter, for example, and how we can harness that for environmental monitoring. And the other project is around aesthetic value and really looks at images, image material, and how we can use artificial intelligence to analyze that at great scale. And I just put this little graphic here to remind ourselves that big data, of course, is more than just lots of data. Okay, so you've got the 4 V's, so volume, velocity, so high-speed real-time analysis, variety, lots of different types of data, and you've got this veracity or validity, which is the quality, and it leads to, in some ways, a fifth V, which is the value of the data, and I will come back to that. Just a little taxonomy in terms of what kind of data we're actually looking at. For example, we use sources like Twitter, Facebook, Weibo, Flickr images, and so on. And from that, you can extract different types of information. So one is really the text, what people talk about, and you can extract keywords and other types of analysis. We can look at images, and I'm sure some of you are using some of these platforms, so you will post images, for example, via Instagram or Flickr, and we can extract metadata. So, for example, location, time, who is posting, and so on. So all this information is available, and the key is how do you put it together to extract something that is meaningful. Now, just to put that in the context of broader monitoring, because we're talking about using these types of data for monitoring, and so we've got a bit of a spectrum here, where on the far right and the bottom you can see professional monitoring, scientific monitoring. Obviously, it requires a great deal of expertise, it's more costly and so on, but the quality of the data is obviously very good. And on the far left you have something that's called collective sensing. So Twitter would be an example where randomly there's thousands and thousands of tweets, some of which may contain useful information or not. And then you've got data sources in between that are a little bit more structured, either sort of for apps, for example, or citizen science programs. Now, this is where Bella will help me out, because I thought it is worth sharing with you some of the IT advances that have been made in the background. In fact, a lot of the time spent on these projects really has to do with setting up the IT infrastructure, and this is probably exactly the point where I pass over to Bella to give you a quick synopsis.
Okay. Thank you, Susanne. As Susanne said, this project is actually building on what already my big data and smart analytics lab started to work to collect social media data. So as I speak now, I collect most social media data in the world. Particularly, we collect Twitter data from Great Barrier Reef region. We also collect any tweet which mention Great Barrier Reef, coral, and other posted anywhere in the world. We collect as well Flickr images and videos. We work with Instagram. We even tapped into China's social media and Weibo social media and collect posts and as well images and videos, considering the number of tourists here on the Great Barrier Reef. So what we've done, we harness available APIs for this social media, but also for open data. For example, we collect as well weather data, open data, and we correlate that with sentiment and so on. But on top of APIs, where APIs are not available, then we crawl the web and capture data and store in my big data clusters. So, a part of contribution, what we are doing as part of this and other projects, of course, we are advancing as well state of the art. So we're not just utilizing the existing algorithm, but we are developing new methods. Specifically, we build hierarchical incremental structures, which are very important when you have a huge amount of data which you need to aggregate and incrementally add, and to ensure that you have very fast visualization. We built on top of the weighted sentiment analysis method, improved the accuracy, speed, as well extended dictionary for domain specific, for tourism, for environment as well. We are also published, or it's at A-star conferences and journals, new methods for machine learning, sentiment analysis, target and aspects identification. We went beyond the supervised methods, which are very costly because of annotation. So, and built unsupervised, but now we are proposing the semi-supervised methods. Also as part of the second NESP project, which actually triggered this research in this area, where we are harnessing deep learning and convolutional neural network, not just, I will say a few words later, not just to identify the content, but also to store that details for specific fish on what geographic GPS location in the database, and we can use that later. And we also advanced these methods to be able to communicate with the aesthetic value, and eventually is able to calculate the aesthetic value for every image or video, basically.
Thank you. All right, so that's a brief summary on some of the work behind the scene, but what I really want to share as well today is what can we actually use that for. So we will demonstrate to do some applications, some are almost finished, some are sort of more in the early days, but just to start with, the most obvious one in terms of Twitter usage, which is the first project, is to look at what do people talk about, how relevant is it to the reef, who is it, where is it, and so on. And so this is a screenshot of a website that we have developed, a proof of concept of how you can visualize some of the content that people post. And so just in terms of volume, there's about 1,500 tweets a day that we download for this region. Some talk about the reef, some talk about something else. And so what you can see here is basically visualizing the algorithm that it extracts the topic. So what is this about? This is a bit of a tourism lens, but of course you can extract other topics like we looked at coral bleaching. You can test, for example, the impact of a conservation campaign. So we had interest by some NGOs who, of course, these days a lot of the stewardship or advocacy campaigns run through social media, and what works well, what attracts a lot of feedback and support ultimately, for example, financially to help out. So you can basically track this, and you can then see, so the map here, for example, shows where people who posted from the region, where do they come from Melbourne, from America, and so on. So that exists. It's not a live website because it needs a lot more testing, but it's completely possible, and you can extract and cut the pie if you want from any angle. This just shows a screenshot of sentiment analysis, where the algorithm can score if a tweet is positive, negative. So for example, really said about the coral bleaching, obviously would get quite a negative score. Some tweets say had a fantastic day diving, so these kinds of species, that would give a positive score. And so you can cut that by space, by time, by keywords, and visualize it. So that's one of the areas of use. Another one, again, this is really based on text analysis, is about red flags. So what you can see on the left here is just a global signal on coral bleaching. So we also extracted tweets globally and looked for a combination of Great Barrier Reef and coral bleaching keywords. There was about 50,000, and you can really follow, of course, what the global response and discussion is on that. So if you were interested in that, you could then look into exactly who are these people and where are they in the world and so on. So that's of interest. And of course, from a tourism perspective, there's an interest in... Can you still hear me?
Yeah, lost it.
Lost the power?
Yeah.
It's okay? Keep going?
Yeah, keep low.
Okay, so you can see a map of China here, and we looked at Weibo, which is a Chinese social media channel, and how many Chinese talk about the Great Barrier Reef, so you can visualize, and again you could pick up if there's particular topics that are maybe concerning in terms of an advocacy or image point of view. Now, looking at using some of that social media data and integrating it or putting it alongside some of the other data, and would like to thank Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority for sharing some of the eye on the reef data, and also Coral Watch, obviously a citizen science program. And so what you can see here is the more red, the more bleaching. We focus on coral here just because it's a common denominator across those data sets. And of course we know, I'm showing here the known that in the north there was more bleaching in 2016 than in the south. But what's really interesting for us is to assess to what extent do those data sources overlap, and can we use some of the lower quality sources to infill or interpolate where we maybe lack some of the more professional, costly surveys. And so that's what we're doing here. And so just to show you one chart, which is work in progress. This is a long latitude, so south-north gradient of the different types of data sources, whereby a high score would indicate not bleaching or dark coral, and a lower score would indicate bleaching. And so we compare the different data sources, including Twitter, which in the moment is on a different scale. So we have to rescale that. But what we're really interested in is whether there's similar trends and whether we can in some ways evaluate one data set with the other. Okay, now just moving to images, which in some ways probably for the environmental monitoring has greater promise than the text, which I think is more useful for maybe more the socioeconomic monitoring. Here we used eye tracking technology in the lab to look at basically systematically exposing people to images of the Great Barrier Reef and ask what they like, what they think is beautiful, and where their eyes fixate on the screen. So it's an objective measurement instead of just relying on self-report. And we can see that people prefer looking at beautiful images rather than images of bleaching, for example. And by doing that in a systematic way, we found what attributes in an image are associated with a higher aesthetic score. And we use that information, now in Ibella again, to train the algorithm to then score at large scale incoming imagery, for example, from Flickr or Instagram. So the way this works, passing over.
So I will probably briefly, not too much. So we used first eye tracking, identified the heat maps where people are looking and what they are scoring. So we use machine learning to identify what people look and how they perceive. Then we did the variation with images depending on light, depending on is it turtle, on white, on bleach coral. It's not working, I think. On bleach coral or colorful and so on. So we found these patterns, and additionally we trained the system with 2,500 hour images, which is not that enough for deep learning. So we used additional available 50,000 images from AVO, a static value analysis database, for initial training and then additional training of this deep learning network. And at the moment we are producing the results on images which will indicate that regardless, that when you receive the image or video, we can put the score how people perceive that one. So the left side, it's a convolutional neural network. It basically says how we do the fish ID identification, and this spatial pyramid pooling layer is, we used this method for aesthetic value calculation. So as I said previously, we don't just rely on methods which are published in the literature, but we also extend the state of the art and create the methods and algorithms which are suited for these kind of applications.
Okay, great. And so how this translates now into automated identification of underwater images, Rod will explain to you a little bit more about that.
Is this on now?
I think we all speak loud.
So we began this with imagery coming in from social media, and that was the initial intent, and that's working well. But a lot of other uses have come to people's mind, and there's a lot of interest from along the Queensland coast for various different reasons. The three key ones are for the monitoring side of things. So I'll show you an image in a minute of a video running where there's automated identification and counting of the fish and turtles and other animals. And so that's very empowering for monitoring, creating or enhancing visitor experiences is another big one. And then there can be alerts. There is some interest in finding out where the dangerous animals are so that people can avoid them, and so on. We've been doing a bunch of species across the GBR. It started with what we had images for, videos or still images, but we've started to focus on what Gabrunka calls species of interest, so mostly indicator species, and we're about to do another run and significantly increase the number of species that we have automatically identifying. And this is what it looks like. So if you're in the audience and you're thinking that this is empowering for something you're about to do, then catch us at lunchtime. Just runs for about 15 seconds, and then I'll hand back to Susanne for the conclusion.
So this basically how it comes on Weibo or Flickr or Twitter video. We are in a real time identifying species and storing it inside database. I have dedicated 3,500 cores for this deep learning and identification.
So the interesting thing about this is that obviously there's a lot of imagery out there, whether it's photos, videos, whether it's just taken by people who probably don't even know what they're taking, or whether it's taken by professionals. What we have shown now as a proof of concept is that it's achievable to train the algorithm to recognize, basically with 100% accuracy, the species that you have trained the machine for, obviously, and nothing else. But
as
when
well
you train,
as
you can
aesthetic value.
Yeah, so it's recognizing the species and then scoring an aesthetic value, which is a different exercise on top of that. So we're quite excited about that. We can see lots of opportunity because you can process so much data at a fast speed. Just to wrap up, I think the first point I would like to make is that using social media and using big data analysis, it can be useful. We've obviously also encountered a lot of problems. It's sometimes like a needle in a haystack, and some media are better suited than others. Twitter, for example, I think is very good for socioeconomic monitoring. It's good for seeing how people respond to certain things, but it's maybe less suited to exactly monitoring environmental conditions, partly because people are not educated enough. So they see something, they share it, but it may not be accurate. So there's some use cases, but in terms of environmental monitoring, we're probably relying more on the imagery, which we can extract more useful information from. We've demonstrated a few use cases, whether it's warning systems, whether it's accounting of species or behaviors, whether it's large-scale rating of aesthetic value. And so I think the photo image processing, hopefully, gets some of you excited and has a lot of potential in the environmental monitoring space. So thank you, everyone. Any questions?
Given it is, we are a little bit out of time, but given it's such a new and innovative technique, I think we might allow a question or two. Oh, by the way, so Susanne, you have to leave this afternoon? You're here for lunch?
Yeah, we leave at about 3:30.
At 3:30, so all of you?
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got another workshop to go to tomorrow in New Zealand somewhere. So make sure, if there's, like, we have one question, yeah? But otherwise, make sure you catch these guys at lunchtime because they won't be around late this afternoon.
Hello there. Just a quick question. Can the machine learn the wrong thing if enough people say it? So when you're going to social media, we are seeing in other fields that people start repeating things that are not right. And if enough people repeat it and you don't do machine learning, do you run the risk to misidentify things because a lot of people are calling it wrong?
Yeah, maybe I can answer. Yeah, you are right. There is a lot of misinformation in social media. You can monitor mine, and we are publishing something on fake news and rumor detection as well. So you can, you need to identify actually what is fake news, what is not, and we are working on that as well.
I might just add to, because we looked at the tweets that contain coral bleaching, and I looked at the top tweets which are retweeted many, many times, and in some ways they made up about 60% of the total volume. What that makes me think is in terms of global damage control and some of that viral behavior, that it's actually coming down to a small number of news items that are retweeted over and over again, you could contain that or respond if they were fake news. So these are really important patterns that one can get actually on top of if you recognize them soon enough.
Okay, guys, we have to thank our speakers and break for lunch.